This is Apollo Saturn Launch Control. We passed the 6-minute mark in our countdown for Apollo 11, the flight to land of the first men on the moon. Good luck and Godspeed. 10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5.
July 20th, 1969. The day humanity took its first steps beyond Earth.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, part of the Apollo 11 mission, became the first humans to step foot on the moon. Decades later, skeptics still question whether it truly happened. Was the moon landing an extraordinary scientific achievement, or rather a fabricated event orchestrated by the US government?
For over half a century, the Apollo 11 moon landing has stood as one of history's greatest achievements. But some claim it never happened, pointing to inconsistencies, missing evidence, and government secrecy. Are we deceived? Could NASA have fabricated one of history's most iconic moments? To get the truth, we must examine the alleged proof and the counter-arguments that challenge the conspiracy theories. Only then can we separate speculation from science.
After World War II, the Cold War created intense political and military rivalries between the US and Soviet Union. Initially focused on nuclear weapons, the conflict shifted to a technological race, the space race. The Soviets launched Sputnik 1, the first satellite in Earth's orbit, pressuring the US to respond. To regain dominance, President John F. Kennedy declared that America would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth.
Achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
This announcement set the stage for the Apollo missions, but also ignited speculation among skeptics.
The Cold War wasn't just a battle of ideologies. It was a race for technological superiority. By the late 1950s, the US and the Soviet Union were locked in competition, each striving to prove their dominance. When the Soviets first launched Sputnik in 1957, it was more than just the first satellite in orbit. It was a declaration to the United States that the Soviet Union was ahead of them. The US responded swiftly though, founding NASA in 1958, but the Soviets kept pushing forward. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, leaving America to play catch-up yet again. The pressure mounted, leading President John F. Kennedy to issue a bold challenge in 1962 to land a man on the moon and bring him back safely before the decade ended. This wasn't just about exploration, it was about proving American superiority. More than 5 decades later, the legacy of the space race still shapes our world today. The technology developed for the Apollo missions laid out the foundation for modern space exploration, influencing satellite communications, planetary rovers, and even future missions beyond the moon. Yet skepticism still remains. The moon landing conspiracy theories that started in the 1970s still circulate online today, fueled by distrust in the government and misinformation. As NASA prepares for the Artemis missions, aiming to return humans to the moon by the mid-2020s, the same question arises. Will this mission finally silence the skeptics, or will doubt persist forever? The space race may have ended, but humanity's quest to push beyond the Earth is far from over. The moon was once our final frontier, but today, it's just our beginning.
Skepticism surrounding the moon landing began largely with Bill Kaysing, a former Rocketdyne employee who claimed the US lacked the technology for such an ambitious mission.
Bill Kaysing here. I just want to let you know I was there. I worked at Rocketdyne. I saw the plans, the deadlines, the technology, and I knew we weren't going to the moon. NASA didn't have the ability in 1969, and they don't have it now. They had to fake it. They had no choice. You look at the Van Allen radiation belt, deadly radiation that no human could survive. NASA claims the Apollo spacecraft had proper shielding. But if that's true, why haven't astronauts gone beyond low Earth orbit since? Because they can't. They never did. Then there's the blueprints theory. The entire Saturn V rocket, the most advanced spacecraft ever built. And NASA just lost the original plans? That's impossible. You don't misplace something like that. Those blueprints contain every detail of how the rocket worked, down to the engineering specifications. They were the key to replicating the technology, yet somehow they vanished. Convenient, right? If NASA really landed men on the moon, those documents would be preserved like a sacred artifact. Referenced time and time again, but they aren't, because that rocket never truly worked the way they claimed. And the flag, the rippling flag moving like that in its wind, because there is no wind on the moon. They say it had a horizontal rod, but watch the footage. There's movement, natural movement, like air is pushing against it, because it was filmed on the Earth. This wasn't about exploration. It was about winning the space race. The Soviets had Sputnik. They had the first man in orbit. America needed a victory. But we couldn't actually land on the moon, so it made the world believe we did. A Hollywood production, broadcast worldwide. They want you to believe it happened, but the deeper you dig, the more you realize it was all a lie, and one day the truth will come out.
Moon landing skeptics present several claims, but scientific evidence directly contradicts their arguments.
Hello, I'm Mr. Jones. I wrote a paper on the NASA's risk assessment for both all the Apollo missions and shuttle missions. When we look at the Apollo mission, NASA reportedly put out a statement saying that there was about less than 5% of a chance of landing on the moon and coming back, as well as one NASA employee saying that we would have to kill 33 astronauts to land just 3 on the moon. With this, it's hard to skeptics believe that it would be hard for NASA to actually attempt it because there's such a public image governmental body that they need the support of the public, the everyday American. So that's why they believe they faked it, because the risk assessment was so low. If they failed, it could destroy all of their funding and further exploration of space as a whole. With this, there's some understanding of why they would have taken on the risk. With JFK's statement wanting to land on the moon by the end of the decade, 1970, we landed in 1969, being almost there, makes sense why they would have taken the risk. Also, Neil Armstrong says that there was about a 50% chance of landing on the moon, and a 90% chance of survival, along with Buzz Aldrin saying that there was about a 2/3 chance of survival and 1/3 chance of landing on the moon. So with that, it makes sense why they would have taken that risk.
The Van Allen belts are regions of high energy charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field, and crossing them can lead to increased radiation exposure, which can damage sensitive electronics and potentially pose health risks to humans.
The Van Allen belts are 2 belts, donut-shaped, that surround the Earth. They emit high energy charged particles that are trapped within Earth's magnetic field. This can lead to increased radiation exposure and can damage sensitive electronics. This was a major problem going into the landing of the moon, and NASA had to navigate this correctly. Many skeptics of the moon landing believe that the intense radiation would kill the astronauts from the Van Allen belts, which surround the moon, and they emit that radiation, it would mean that NASA would not be able to land on the moon, which is why they think they faked it. Obviously, these belts that surround both the moon and Earth are very dangerous, and so NASA went into this as they added a metal, reinforced metal around the command module, which went through the Van Allen belts, and they timed their trajectory to go through the Van Allen belts at a precise moment to go through the least amount of radiation possible, which is why they were able to land on the moon with very little amount of radiation, but there still was some. And that's why they landed on the moon. Many people who believe the moon landing was fake use one specific piece of evidence, and that is the shoe image that was taken on the moon from Neil Armstrong's footprint. It shows a design that's ridged, and when we look at the spacesuit in this from Neil Armstrong, you can see that there's no design like that on it. So many conspiracists believe that that's why the moon landing was faked, because they either lost the shoe or it doesn't match, showing that it doesn't work out. However, it was left on the lunar surface because of weight restrictions.
I am a Russian scientist, and during the Apollo 11 mission in 1969, America's biggest rival, the USSR, can confirm the landing of Apollo 11 on the moon. USSR, America's biggest competitor, can confirm the flight patterns, the launch and the landing of Apollo 11 on the moon. With our flight radar, flight stations, and impressive technology, we can confirm and also deny all the theories of these American conspiracies during the time. So, as a Russian scientist, I can confirm the Apollo 11 moon landing was real.
No credible whistleblowers have ever come forward with a verifiable piece of evidence that the moon landings were fake. Despite the vast number of people, over 400,000 engineers, scientists, and technicians who all worked on the Apollo programs, not a single insider has produced a concrete piece of hoax. Claims made by moon landing deniers often rely on misinterpreted photos, conspiracy theories, or pseudoscientific arguments, rather than first-hand testimony or documentation. In fact, many former NASA employees and astronauts have strongly defended the authenticity of these missions with detailed accounts and technical data that align with the independent tracking of other countries, like the Soviet Union. The absence of these credible whistleblowers, despite the scale and scrutiny of the Apollo program, strongly supports that the moon landings were definitely real.
As the American flag seems to ripple on the surface of the moon during the Apollo 11 mission, conspiracy theorists have long pointed to this footage as proof that the landing was staged on Earth. When people point to the flag moving, they say, "Wait, there's no wind on the moon." But that's not the whole picture. The flag moves because there's no wind on the moon. The astronauts twisted a pole into the ground which held the flag, and the flag actually had a couple other poles inside it that made it look more appealing and patriotic. Now, the stars, that's another favorite. You'll notice that the sky is pitch black, no stars. But that's because the cameras were adjusted for daylight on the moon's surface, and stars are pretty faint, so you'd need a long exposure to capture them. Or maybe there's no stars because NASA just forgot to add them. In a studio, stars would be hard to fake consistently. It's easier to just leave them out and hope that nobody notices. But I noticed. With Cold War pressure building and the space race intensifying, some theorists speculate that the US couldn't afford to lose, so they faked it. Think about it. 1969, Hollywood is at its peak. The government has both the motive, the budget, and the secrecy. People often compare the moon footage to the classic 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. The movie came out just a year earlier, and it looks eerily similar. Same lighting, same movement. If NASA was gonna fake it, they'd want it to look real. And they had access to the people who knew exactly how. Then there's the Kubrick theory. Some people believe that Stanley Kubrick actually directed the fake moon footage. He had the skill. 2001: A Space Odyssey proved that. And then there are people who say that The Shining is actually full of clues, and it's his secret coded confession to filming the whole moon landing. It's crazy, but it's oddly interesting.
bottom step, to the bottom step. I'm on it. Yep. Oh, okay.
The moon landing conspiracy is built on doubt, suspicion, and the belief that history may not be as it seems. But when we move beyond speculation and examine the facts, the truth becomes undeniable. Apollo 11 did happen. The physical evidence, global tracking, and the testimony of scientists far outweigh the claims of deception. While skepticism will always exist, the legacy of Apollo 11 stands, proving that humanity's first steps on the moon were real.